agents executed a coordinated raid across New York City. They hit more than a dozen locations simultaneously, including the Brooklyn home of the mayor's chief fundraiser, the residences of his Turkish liaisons, and properties connected to a former Turkish Airlines executive. Days later, federal agents stopped New York City Mayor Eric Adams on the street and seized his cell phones and iPad. What investigators discovered would make Adams the first sitting mayor in New York City's 400-year history to be criminally indicted by federal prosecutors. The charges: bribery, wire fraud, conspiracy, and soliciting illegal campaign contributions from a foreign government. The scheme involved luxury travel worth over $100,000, straw donors funneling Turkish money into political campaigns, and a fire safety scandal that put lives at risk, all to benefit the government of Turkey and its authoritarian president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. But the story doesn't end with the indictment. In April 2025, in a move that sparked one of the biggest scandals in Department of Justice history, the Trump administration ordered prosecutors to dismiss all charges, triggering mass resignations of federal prosecutors who refused to comply. This is the complete story of corruption, foreign influence, and political interference at the highest levels of American government. Section 1. Who is Eric Adams? To understand how this corruption scheme worked, you need to understand Eric Adams's rise to power in New York City politics. Eric Adams began his career as an NYPD officer, serving for 22 years before entering politics. He positioned himself as a moderate Democrat focused on public safety, economic development, and representing working-class communities. Adams first won elected office as a New York State Senator in 2006, then became Brooklyn Borough President in 2013, a largely ceremonial position that nevertheless gave him significant influence over development projects and city contracts in Brooklyn, one of New York City's 5 boroughs. But Adams had bigger ambitions. In 2021, he ran for mayor of New York City in a crowded Democratic primary field. His campaign focused on fighting crime, supporting police, and bringing business-friendly economic policies to a city still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. Adams won the Democratic primary in June 2021 and easily defeated Republican Curtis Sliwa in the November general election, becoming New York City's 110th mayor and only the second black mayor in the city's history. What the public didn't know was that Adams's rise to power had been fueled by illegal foreign money, luxury bribes, and corrupt deals with Turkish government officials, a scheme that federal prosecutors later determined had been running for nearly a decade. According to the indictment unsealed in September 2024, Adams began accepting benefits from Turkish nationals and government officials as early as 2016, when he was still Brooklyn Borough President. These weren't small favors. They were systematic bribes designed to purchase influence over one of America's most powerful local officials. The Turkish government had identified Adams as a rising political star who could one day control City Hall. They were right, and they were willing to pay handsomely to ensure his loyalty. Section 2, the Turkish connection. Turkey's interest in cultivating Eric Adams wasn't random. It was part of a broader Turkish government strategy to gain influence over American politicians at multiple levels of government. Turkey, under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has become increasingly authoritarian. Erdogan has cracked down on political opposition, imprisoned journalists, purged the military and judiciary, and suppressed ethnic minorities. Human rights organizations have documented widespread abuses. This creates tension with the United States, which provides military aid and maintains strategic partnerships with Turkey through NATO. But Turkey's human rights record, its actions in Syria, its purchase of Russian weapon systems, and its conflicts with U.S. allies like Greece and the Kurds all create friction in the relationship. For Turkey, having friendly American politicians who could advocate for Turkish interests, or at least not oppose them, was extremely valuable. According to federal prosecutors, a senior Turkish diplomatic official became the primary architect of the scheme to cultivate Eric Adams. The indictment doesn't name this official, but describes him as a high-ranking member of Turkey's foreign service with significant authority and resources. This Turkish official identified Adams as a promising target in 2016, when Adams was Brooklyn Borough President, but clearly had mayoral ambitions. The official began arranging benefits for Adams: luxury travel, illegal campaign contributions, and access to wealthy Turkish businessmen. But there was a test of loyalty first. In 2017, Adams was invited to an event at the Turkish Cultural Center in Brooklyn, an organization that promoted the teachings of Fethullah Gulen, a Turkish cleric living in exile in Pennsylvania. Here's where it gets interesting. Erdogan blames Gulen for orchestrating a failed coup attempt against him in 2016. Whether Gulen was actually involved remains disputed, but Erdogan has made crushing Gulen's movement a top priority. Turkey has designated Gulen's organization as a terrorist group and has pressured other countries to crack down on Gulen-affiliated institutions. According to the indictment, the Turkish official gave Adams an ultimatum. If he wanted to continue receiving benefits and support from Turkey, he had to cut ties with the Gulen-affiliated Cultural Center. Adams complied. He stopped associating with the organization. This was the beginning of a corrupt relationship that would last nearly a decade. Section 3, the luxury travel scheme. Once Adams demonstrated his willingness to cooperate, the benefits began flowing. From 2016 to 2021, Eric Adams received free or heavily discounted luxury travel on Turkish Airlines, which is partly owned by the Turkish government, worth more than $123,000. This wasn't coach seating. Adams received complimentary business class tickets and upgrades on international flights to Turkey, France, Sri Lanka, China, Hungary, and Ghana. Let's be clear about what $123,000 in business class travel looks like. A single business class ticket from New York to Istanbul can cost $5,000 to $8,000. Adams made multiple trips, sometimes bringing staff members whose travel was also covered, but Adams and the Turkish officials knew this was illegal. U.S. law prohibits elected officials from accepting gifts worth more than minimal amounts, and it absolutely prohibits accepting anything of value from foreign governments. So they created a cover-up scheme. According to the indictment, Adams' staff would coordinate with Turkish Airlines managers to create fake paper trails, making it appear that Adams had paid for the flights. In reality, he paid nothing or only a token amount. Text messages and emails recovered by the FBI show Adams' staff requesting that Turkish Airlines charge a real price to make the records look legitimate. Then the airline would simply not collect payment or would charge a tiny fraction of the actual cost. Adams also stayed at luxury hotels at far below market rates. While in Istanbul, he stayed at the St. Regis Istanbul, the Raffles Istanbul, and other five-star properties, paying nothing or dramatically reduced rates arranged by his Turkish contacts. He dined at high-end restaurants, was driven in luxury vehicles, and received VIP treatment throughout his travels, all arranged and paid for by Turkish nationals and government officials. The indictment details one particularly brazen example. In 2017, Adams and a staff member flew business class to Istanbul on Turkish Airlines. The actual cost would have been approximately $15,000. Adams's records showed he paid $50. The scheme worked because Adams held positions of power that were valuable to Turkey. As Brooklyn Borough president and later as a mayoral candidate and mayor, Adams had influence over city contracts, development approvals, and, crucially, relationships with federal officials who made decisions about U.S.-Turkey relations. Section 4. The illegal campaign contributions. Luxury travel was only part of the scheme. The Turkish official and his associates also funneled illegal campaign contributions to Adams's political campaigns. U.S. law is crystal clear. Foreign nationals cannot contribute to American political campaigns. This prohibition exists to prevent foreign governments from buying influence over U.S. elections and officials. But according to prosecutors, Adams, the Turkish official, and Turkish businessmen conspired to circumvent this law through a straw donor scheme. Here's how it worked. Turkish nationals would provide money to U.S. citizens who would then make campaign contributions in their own names. This hid the true source of the money and made it appear as though the contributions came from legal American donors. Between 2018 and 2021, Adams's campaigns received illegal donations from Turkish sources funneled through straw donors. These contributions alone would have been a serious crime. But there's a second layer that makes it even worse. New York City has a public matching funds program designed to amplify small donations from city residents. The program matches individual contributions at a rate of 8-to-1, meaning a $250 donation generates $2,000 in public funds for the candidate. This program is intended to reduce the influence of wealthy donors and encourage candidates to raise money from ordinary constituents, but it requires candidates to certify that all contributions are legal and properly sourced. Adams falsely certified his campaign contributions as legal, knowing they included illegal foreign donations. As a result, his campaign improperly received over $10 million in public matching funds, taxpayer money that his campaign wasn't entitled to because it was based on fraudulent donations. Think about that. Turkish government-connected individuals illegally funneled money into Adams' campaign. Adams lied about it to election authorities. And as a result, New York City taxpayers handed his campaign $10 million in public funds. The indictment details specific instances where Adams' staff coordinated with the Turkish official to arrange straw donations, discussed how to hide the source of the funds, and created false documentation to cover their tracks. Section 5, the fire safety scandal. In 2021, everything came to a head in what prosecutors describe as a classic quid pro quo, a direct exchange of an official act for a bribe. Turkey had constructed a new consulate building in Manhattan, a gleaming 36-story skyscraper called the Turkish House, located across from the United Nations headquarters. The building cost hundreds of millions of dollars and was a prestige project for President Erdogan, who had personally championed its construction. The building was scheduled to open in September 2021 to coincide with a high-profile visit to New York by President Erdogan for the United Nations General Assembly. This was a major diplomatic event, and Turkey desperately wanted the building operational in time for Erdogan's visit. There was just one problem. The building hadn't passed fire safety inspections. The New York City Fire Department had serious concerns about the building's fire safety systems. According to the indictment, the building would have failed inspection if examined under normal procedures. In September 2021, shortly after Adams won the Democratic primary for mayor and was the clear favorite to win the general election, the Turkish official contacted him with a request. According to the indictment, the official told Adams it was his turn to help Turkey after all the benefits Adams had received. The official asked Adams to pressure the New York City Fire Department to approve the Turkish House to open without a proper fire safety inspection. Adams agreed. Even though Adams was still just the Brooklyn Borough president at the time and therefore had no official jurisdiction over Manhattan or the fire department, he used his position as mayor-elect to pressure the fire commissioner. This is critical. Just 2 weeks earlier, the fire commissioner had asked Adams whether he would keep him in his position once Adams became mayor. The commissioner wanted to keep his job, and Adams had leverage. Adams contacted the fire commissioner and pushed for the Turkish House to be approved. According to the indictment, a fire department official responsible for assessing the building's safety was told he would lose his job if he didn't approve the building. The pressure worked. The fire department issued a conditional letter of no objection, allowing the building to open despite the outstanding fire safety concerns. When Adams informed the Turkish official that the building was approved, the official responded effusively, "You are great, Eric. We are so happy to hear that. You are a true friend of Turkey." Think about what happened here. A foreign government official asked an American elected official to compromise public safety to allow a 36-story building to open without proper fire inspections in exchange for bribes. And Adams did it. People could have died if there had been a fire in that building before the safety systems were properly installed and inspected. Section 6, the cover-up. As Adams' political profile rose and he became mayor in January 2022, he and his associates knew they were vulnerable to exposure, so they engaged in an extensive cover-up. According to the indictment, Adams repeatedly told staff to delete messages with his Turkish contacts. Text messages recovered by prosecutors show Adams assuring one co-conspirator that he always deleted her messages. When the FBI began investigating in 2023, Adams and his staff scrambled to create false narratives and destroy evidence. Adams also attempted to obstruct the investigation by providing false and misleading statements to investigators about the source of his travel benefits and campaign contributions. The cover-up didn't work. Federal investigators had already gathered text messages, emails, financial records, travel documents, and testimony from cooperating witnesses. On November 2nd, 2023, the FBI executed coordinated search warrants across New York City. They raided the home of Brianna Suggs, Adams' chief fundraiser, seizing phones, laptops, and campaign finance documents. They also searched the homes of Rana Abbasova, Adams' liaison to the Turkish community, who later became a cooperating witness, and Cenk Okal, a former Turkish Airlines executive who had helped arrange Adams' luxury travel. Days later, FBI agents approached Adams on the street and seized his phones and iPad. Adams claimed his attorneys told him to cooperate, but the seizure was clearly a major escalation in the federal investigation. Over the following months, the investigation expanded. More officials connected to Adams had their phones seized. Top members of his administration began resigning. In September 2024, Police Commissioner Edward Caban resigned after his phone was seized in a separate but related investigation into whether his twin brother was selling police protection to nightclubs. The walls were closing in. Section 7. The indictment on September 26, 2024. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York unsealed a 57-page indictment charging Eric Adams with 5 federal crimes: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, federal programs bribery, and to receive campaign contributions by foreign nationals, wire fraud, solicitation of a contribution by a foreign national, 2 counts. Bribery. Adams became the first sitting mayor of New York City ever to be criminally indicted. At a press conference, U.S. Attorney Damian Williams didn't mince words. The conduct alleged in the indictment, the foreign money, the corporate money, the years of concealment, is a grave breach of the public's trust. The indictment painted a damning picture: an ambitious politician who sold his influence to a foreign government in exchange for luxury perks and illegal campaign money, then used his power to compromise public safety and enrich his benefactors. Adams held a defiant press conference outside Gracie Mansion, the mayor's official residence. "I ask New Yorkers to wait to hear our defense before making any judgments," Adams said. He claimed the charges were politically motivated and vowed to fight them. His attorney, Alex Spiro, a celebrity lawyer who has represented Elon Musk and other high-profile clients, immediately attacked the case, claiming there was no quid pro quo and describing the luxury travel as mere gratuities rather than bribes. Adams pleaded not guilty at his arraignment the next day. As the case proceeded, calls for Adams' resignation grew. Fellow Democrats, good government groups, and editorial boards across the country urged him to step down. Adams refused. He continued to serve as mayor while under federal indictment, an unprecedented situation in New York City history. The trial was scheduled for April 2025. Prosecutors indicated they might file additional charges and name additional defendants as the investigation continued. Then everything changed. Section 8, the Trump administration dismissal. On November 5th, 2024, Donald Trump won the presidential election and began preparing to take office in January 2025. Adams, despite being a Democrat, quickly began signaling that he was open to working with Trump. He made appearances on conservative media, criticized the Biden administration, and even gave an interview to Tucker Carlson claiming his prosecution was politically motivated. Some observers speculated that Adams was angling for a pardon or favorable treatment from the incoming Trump administration. In November 2024, Trump publicly stated he would look at pardoning Adams, saying, "I think he was treated pretty unfairly." When Trump took office in January 2025, he installed loyalists at the Department of Justice, including Emil Bove as Deputy Attorney General. Bove had previously served as one of Trump's personal defense attorneys. In April 2025, the Trump administration took an extraordinary step. The Justice Department ordered federal prosecutors to dismiss the case against Eric Adams. The response from career prosecutors was immediate and unprecedented. Danielle Sassoon, who had been appointed as acting U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York by Trump himself, refused to sign the dismissal. She resigned in protest instead, releasing a scathing letter accusing the Justice Department of political interference. 5 other prosecutors on the Adams case joined her in resigning. They walked away from their careers rather than dismiss what they believed was a solid criminal case. The Justice Department then moved the case from New York to the Public Integrity Section in Washington, D.C., which typically handles high-level corruption cases. When Public Integrity Section leadership was informed they were expected to dismiss the case, they also resigned. John Keller, the acting head of the unit, and Kevin Driscoll, the most senior career official in the criminal division, both quit rather than sign off on the dismissal. In total, at least 11 federal prosecutors resigned rather than comply with orders to drop the Adams case. Assistant U.S. Attorney Hagan Scotton wrote in his resignation letter that only a fool or a coward would agree to dismiss the case. On April 2nd, 2025, despite the mass resignations, the Justice Department filed a motion to dismiss all charges against Eric Adams. U.S. District Judge Dale Ho, who was presiding over the case, issued a remarkable opinion. He refused to dismiss the case without prejudice, which would have allowed prosecutors to refile charges later. Instead, Judge Ho dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning Adams can never be prosecuted again for these crimes, but included scathing language in his opinion. Judge Ho wrote that the dismissal request smacks of a bargain, dismissal of the indictment in exchange for immigration policy concessions. He noted that Adams had begun cooperating with Trump's immigration enforcement priorities shortly before the charges were dropped, and suggested that Adams' freedom appeared to depend on his ability to carry out the immigration enforcement priorities of the Trump administration. The judge essentially accused the Trump administration of trading prosecutorial decisions for political favors. Section 9, what this means. The dismissal of the Eric Adams case represents one of the most controversial uses of executive power over federal prosecutions in modern American history. Here's what we know. Eric Adams was charged with serious crimes based on substantial evidence, including text messages, financial records, cooperating witnesses, and documented benefits he received from foreign nationals. Career federal prosecutors, many of whom had spent decades in the Justice Department, believed the case was strong enough to proceed to trial. When ordered to dismiss the case for what they believed were political reasons, at least 11 prosecutors chose to resign rather than comply. A federal judge publicly questioned the motivations behind the dismissal and suggested it was part of a political bargain. The implications are profound. First, it raises serious questions about whether foreign governments can buy influence over American politicians if those politicians have connections to sympathetic presidential administrations. Second, it demonstrates that even substantial evidence of corruption may not lead to accountability if the accused has political leverage. Third, it shows that the independence of federal prosecutors, long considered a cornerstone of the American justice system, can be overridden by political appointees at the Justice Department. Adams continues to serve as mayor of New York City. He faces a difficult re-election campaign in 2025, but he can campaign knowing he will never face criminal prosecution for the conduct alleged in the indictment. The Turkish government achieved its objective. They cultivated a relationship with a powerful American official, received favorable treatment, and saw that official escape accountability, the bigger picture. The Eric Adams case is a story about corruption, foreign influence, and political interference that reaches from the offices of City Hall to the highest levels of the federal government. It shows how foreign governments target American politicians, how those politicians can compromise public safety and democratic principles for personal gain, and how political connections can shield even well-documented corruption from accountability. The FBI agents who conducted the investigation, the career prosecutors who built the case, and the witnesses who testified all did their jobs. They gathered evidence, secured an indictment, and prepared for trial. But in the end, political power trumped the criminal justice system. Whether you believe Adams was guilty or innocent, whether you think the case should have proceeded or been dismissed, one thing is clear: the American people deserve to see this evidence tested in a courtroom with a jury of Adams' peers deciding his guilt or innocence based on facts and law, not political considerations. Instead, we're left with unanswered questions and a troubling precedent about accountability for those with the right political connections. If you found this investigation valuable, subscribe to the Enforcement Files and hit that notification bell. We cover federal corruption, political scandals, and cases the mainstream media buries or ignores. Drop a comment. Do you think the Trump administration was right to dismiss this case, or did career prosecutors resign because they knew it was political interference? Should Adams face consequences, or was this prosecution overreach? And check out our investigation into Senator Bob Menendez's gold bar bribery scandal, another case of foreign governments buying American politicians that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching the Enforcement Files. Stay vigilant, demand accountability, and I'll see you in the next investigation.